Hi everybody, so today I am pre-recording a video to be posted tomorrow at 7 p.m. That is the Where My Lore Started book tag. This is a popular thing on BookTube right now, and I stole this book tag from Carrie Can Read. I'm also going to be doing a tier list of books I read in school for my books that I read in school. Does my opinion change TBR list at the end of the book tag? Since I never did that as part of my wrap up for the end of the 2024 because I was still reading books for that TBR at that time. So the first book is, what's the first book you remember reading by yourself? Probably the Magic School Bus series or the Arthur books for picture books. And then for chapter books, Babysitter's Club, Boxcar Children, Nancy Drew, stuff like that. Which character did you identify with as a child? Mallory from the Babysitter's Club series, because she liked to write and she liked to read. What were your elementary school comfort reads? So I had this collection of great illustrated classics, and my favorite ones were Heidi and Tom Sawyer. I can't remember which other classics were part of that series, and I don't remember if we even still have them anymore. I think we probably sold them when we moved away from Massachusetts in 1997. The next thing was Babysitter's Club, as I just said, Sweet Valley High, and what started my interest in reading historical fiction books were American Girl and Dear America. And my favorite Dear America book was the one that was about the Oregon Trail, and my favorite American Girl was Molly, followed by Felicity. What was your safe space as a child? The library or the bookstore. I participated in many summer reading programs at the library throughout my childhood in Massachusetts and my teenage years in New Hampshire. The next question. Has your book taste changed since childhood? I mean, it's deviated a little bit because more recently I have gotten into reading fan fiction and memoirs. Not fan fiction, nonfiction and memoirs. I like reading biographies about actors and sports figures and stuff like that. My favorite memoirs are Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing by Matthew Perry, Have I Told You This Already by Lauren Graham, The Third Gilmore Girl by Kelly Bishop, and Educated by Tara Westover, just to name a few of them. Did you feel inspired to read by your school, and if so, how? So my initial love of reading was started by my mom, who was a children's book author. When I was really little, she used to read to me. And then when I started to read by myself, besides, I read her books as well as reading the picture books that I talked about. We also used to do these readathons in elementary school, and if you remember doing these, leave a comment below. We would do a readathon for our class, and then the people who read the most books by the end of the readathon would get a pizza party. I remember doing this when I was in Lyndhurst Elementary School in Saugus, Massachusetts, and I also loved the Scholastic Book Fair. Favorite or formative YA series? Harry Potter. I have not completed my reread of the Harry Potter series. I'm kind of taking a break. I have read the first 5 books plus Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. The reason why I am not going to read the last two books is because I know that they're really long and I would rather read them at a time when I'm not reading so many other books and I can focus just on those two. So I probably won't be reading those books until the fall when my TBR is not so huge. I still enjoy Harry Potter, but I lost respect for the author of the series, J.K. Rowling, when I found out a couple of years ago that she was transphobic. A book that you had to read in school that you loved. So I'm going to get into this a little bit into more detail in the tier ranking at the end, but some of my favorite books that I read in school were Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl, another book that inspired my love of historical fiction, which I read in 7th grade English class during our Holocaust unit, and that jump-started my interest in reading books set during World War II. As You Like It, which is one of my favorite Shakespeare plays. My other favorite Shakespeare plays are A Midsummer Night's Dream and Romeo and Juliet, and To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I read this book in 9th grade English class at Sohegan High School, and I remember really liking the main female character, Scout, and I read this book last September and rewatched the movie because in English class we also watched the movie with Gregory Peck, and I still love Scout as a main character. She's probably one of my favorite child characters in a book. And if you go back to my mid-year and end-of-year book tags from last year, you will get my full list of child characters, and I neglected to mention Scout in those two videos. I do not have a favorite weirdest book. My 13-year-old self wanted to go to Hogwarts, and I got that experience in real life in 2015 when I went to Universal Studios in Florida and went to Wizarding World of Harry Potter, which I would probably choose to go back to again because I want to go to Disney World for my 40th birthday, but the more I watch the Disney Food Blog YouTube channel, the more I start to realize that Disney World is probably not as affordable as we think it is. And I'm not even sure if we I'm hoping we're gonna be able to save enough money to go there. But Universal Studios or Busch Gardens would probably be our backup place to go if we don't end up going to Disney due to the expense. Is there a newly released book you wish you'd read when you were younger? So as I have mentioned in previous videos, I have cerebral palsy, and I when I was younger, there was not a lot of disability representation in literature, and I'm happy that right now there is getting to be more of that. My favorite book that I have read recently that has a character with cerebral palsy in it is A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kemmerer, which is a modern retelling of Beauty and the Beast. And the main character in this book her name is Alex, and she gets transported into the world of Beauty and the Beast, but her day job is working in Washington, D.C. I think she works for the FBI or one of the places where you, one of the security places, or Bridget Kemmerer also wrote a book I read recently called Forging Silver into Stars, which I gave 4 stars to. and she wrote a trilogy of books that was set during the pandemic that I haven't read yet, and I don't really like reading books based on the pandemic because they hit too close to home for me, but I will eventually give that series a shot. Where is it? I am going to share now my tier ranking for books I read in high school. Does my opinion change? Here it is. Okay, so last year, starting in June, I started a TBR list called Books I Read in School. Does my opinion change? These are books that I read from 6th grade to college, and I figured it would be appropriate to share this tier ranking in this Where My Lore Started TBR so I can discuss about if I still like these books that I read when I was in school or if I didn't like them. I also got this tier ranking heading list from Carrie Can Read, who I got this book tag from. So thank you, Carrie, for all of this material that I used. The first ranking in the tier is Give Me 14 of These, which are basically 5-star books. The first book I read in this tier is A Curious Incident in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. I read this book in a class that I took my freshman year of college for a general education requirement called Multicultural Education. Our professor's name was Phil Huckins, and the main character in this book is a 12-year-old boy from England who has Asperger's syndrome, and I really liked the representation of Asperger's in this syndrome. But this book is left with sort of a cliffhanger because the final scene is him talking to his teacher, and you don't really know what the teacher says in response to him. So I thought that was a really interesting way to end the book. As I said a couple of minutes ago, when I mentioned Shakespeare plays, my favorites were As You Like It, Romeo and Juliet, and A Midsummer Night's Dream. The next book I read in this level of the tier ranking was called Dead Man Walking by Sister Helen Prejean. Sister Helen Prejean was a nun who worked on death row in the 1990s. And this book is her memoir that she wrote about working with a specific death row inmate. The movie of this book stars Susan Sarandon, and I actually really want to see the movie to see how they did with transferring the book to the screen. The next book that I read is Number the Stars by Lois Lowry. This is a middle grade book that I read in 7th grade in Mrs. Curran's English class during our unit on the Holocaust, where we also read Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl, and Alicia, My Story by Alicia Appleman German. So this book is about a little girl named Annalise who lives in the area of Germany that is being invaded by the Nazis, and her family, like Anne Frank's family, are hiding Jewish people from prosecution. So it talks about her harboring these people who are running away from the Nazi police, and I just really love this story. It's very sweet. Lois Lowry came out with another historical fiction middle grade book that I read earlier in 2024 that was set during the Spanish flu epidemic of the 1900s, and I definitely made correlations in that book to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I just talked about To Kill a Mockingbird. The next ranking in this tier listing is Yes Please, which is basically these books were between 4 to 4.5 stars. I talked about Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl. The next book is called Balzac and the Little Chinese Seamstress. This book is a book that I read in World Studies class with Steve Dreher and Dick Miller in 11th grade at Sohegan High School. And I gave this book 4 stars. It's a historical fiction romance that is set during, I think it's like 1800s China or something. I can't remember the year exactly. I really liked the writing in this book and the buildup of the relationship between the 2 main characters. The next book that I read in this tier was Hatchet by Gary Paulson. I read this book in 6th grade English class with Mrs. Kimner at Amherst Middle School, and I remember being really bored by this book when I read it the first time when I was 12, but upon rereading it, I'm not sure why I hated it so much, because I just loved going along with this main character, Brian, who, okay, so what happens is he's on a plane crash because he's going to visit his dad because his parents are divorced, and his plane crashes in the middle of the woods, and he has to learn to survive by himself. And I really love his coming of age and how he learns through surviving in the wilderness how to cope with dealing with his parents' divorce. I really like the writing in this book and the adventure this book took me on with Brian surviving in the wilderness. Hatchet is part of a 3-book series that I have not continued to read yet, but I'm planning to continue. The next book is called Like Water for Chocolate. This book is by Laura Esquivel, and I reviewed this book in the February and March wrap-up that Matt and I posted a couple of weeks ago. I will link that book in the description. This book is a Mexican retelling of the Cinderella fairy tale that shares like folklore of Mexico and also recipes from the country, and we made one of the recipes and we review it in our video. The next book that I read was Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. I really loved John Steinbeck's writing in this book, but like one thing I really don't like about this book is how Lenny is represented. He's supposed to be a mentally retarded character, and I didn't really like how he was represented as a person with a disability, but this book was from the 1950s, and maybe John Steinbeck just didn't know how to write that character properly. That's what I'm guessing. The next book that I read in this tier was The House on Mango Street. This is a series of vignettes about growing up in a Spanish American, Latin American family in the Bronx, New York. It was by this author named Sandra Cisneros, and I remember for an assignment we had to write our own story that was inspired by the writing style of Sandra Cisneros. I don't have an example of that writing piece anymore because I think I threw it away. But I might reread this book and try that as an experiment again. I just loved her writing style. The next book I wanted to talk about is The Pearl, again by John Steinbeck. This book is set off the coast of California in a small fishing town. It features a fisherman family who are trying to make money to survive. The guy's name is Kino and his wife's name is Juana, and I really loved their relationship in this book. I thought it was very sweet, and again, John Steinbeck's writing is very engaging, like Oven, Mice, and Men. The next book in this tier ranking is The Stranger by Albert Camus. This book is by a author named Albert Camus, and he's from France. So this book was a translated work from France. It's about a guy who goes to visit his dad in prison, and it's a very philosophical book. The material in this book went over my head as a 16-year-old, and I think I can have a different appreciation for the philosophical topics that are covered in this book. The next book is the things they carried by Tim O'Brien. This was another book I read during World Studies class in 11th grade with Steve Dreher. This is a collection of essays about people who fought during the Korean War, told from the perspective of the soldiers who were fighting. And when I reread this book, one thing I enjoyed the most about it was the fact that you get to learn what goes on during the front lines of fighting in a war. And I wish there were more books like this that talk about like present day wars, like Iraq and Afghanistan, because that would be actually pretty cool to read. The next book that I read on his tier ranking was The Turn of the Screw. This is a mystery book by Henry James, who is a British author, or he's American, because I read this in American literature class with Kevin Harvey during junior year of college at New England College in Henniker. Kevin sadly passed away from cancer in 2015, and that was really sad to hear. I think about him a lot, and I thought of him a lot while reading this book and The Great Gatsby, which I'll talk about in a little bit. For some reason, when I read this book, I didn't like it, and I can't remember why I didn't like it, but upon rereading it, I actually enjoyed it. I enjoy a mystery with a good plot twist, and this book was full of those. The next listing in this tier ranking is what I ordered. This is basically 3 to 3.5 star books. The first book in this book listing is A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving. I read this book for summer reading before 11th grade. And I remember really enjoying the writing style. Upon reread, I am 63% through this book right now. I am on page 422. This book is like 600 pages, so I'm getting there. But I'm thinking of DNFing it because I'm bored, and it's also quite depressing. But the writing is really good. The next book is called A Separate Peace by John Knowles. This book is set during World War II and is set at a boarding school. And it's basically the story of coming of age of these 3 boys who are going through this boarding school, and their goal in the boarding school is to be mature young men so they can fight in the war. And I don't want to spoil anything about how it ends. So if you have never read this book, check it out. Again, I gave it 3 stars. The next play by William Shakespeare I wanted to talk about is Hamlet. I gave this play 3 stars because obviously it's one of William Shakespeare's tragedies. I'm more apt to like his comedies, like As You Like It and A Midsummer Night's Dream. But I don't mind something tragic every once in a while. Another 3-star Shakespeare play that was downgraded from 4 stars was Romeo and Juliet. So Romeo and Juliet has always been one of my favorite Shakespeare plays. West Side Story, which is a modernization of Romeo and Juliet, has always been one of my favorite Broadway musicals. What made me change my ranking of Romeo and Juliet, is actually reading a fiction book called Fair Rosaline last year, which Carrie Can reads. recommended to me in one of her reading wrap-ups. I read this back in October, I want to say, and it made me change my opinion of Romeo's character. I always thought he was really romantic, but it turns out he's more of a womanizer, kind of like Joey in Friends, because this book is a prequel to Romeo and Juliet that basically talks about how Romeo was first in love with Juliet's cousin Rosaline, who was a nun at a convent in Verona. And he was kind of obsessed with her, and it was really gross. So that actually turned me off to liking Romeo in Romeo and Juliet and made him seem very unromantic to me. The final book in this ranking of the tier listing is The Giver by Lois Lowry. So this is a dystopian book about people who live in a community that's set in the future that's been like ravaged by war and all things bad. And the main character goes to visit this guy called the Giver, and he is the person who like kind of makes predictions of the future. And it was interesting. I like this book. It's okay. I heard that the movie has Taylor Swift in it, and she plays Rosemary, who is the Giver's love interest in a flashback scene. So I would see the movie simply for the fact that she is in it. The Giver is the first book in a series that I also never knew was a series until I looked for it in the library. The second book in the series also got 3.5 stars for me. It's called Gathering Blue. And The Giver has 4 books in the series, and Hatchet has 3 books. So I am halfway done with both series. Oh, the final series. The final ranking in this tier listing is a letdown. I should have just put these in what I ordered, because I didn't really know how to rank them. The only book I gave a low rating to in this part of the list was actually The Great Gatsby, and that rating remained unchanged, but Animal Farm and Lord of the Flies got 3 stars. I didn't like Lord of the Flies because I thought there was too much body horror and violence in it. I didn't like The Great Gatsby because I thought it was kind of boring, and the only reason why I like that book is because of the vibes. I especially like the scene of the party at Jay Gatsby's mansion, and this is another movie that I like that has Leonardo DiCaprio in it. Romeo and Juliet from 1996 is also another Leonardo DiCaprio movie that is a book based on a film based on a book that I like. The last book I wanted to talk about is Animal Farm by George Orwell. I read this book in 8th grade English class with Mrs. Lambert, who sadly also passed away from cancer. She died in 2009. I believe she had breast cancer. So I read this book to honor her, even though it was not my favorite book I read in her class, but it was the only book that stood out to me as something I remembered from that far back. Animal Farm is kind of another dystopian type of book where animals run their own political thing, a political uprising sort of, and the reason why first of all, the political themes in this book really went over my head as a teenager, and I think that's why I didn't appreciate it back then. But rereading it in the 2020s, when we have our own issues with tyranny in our political standpoint with Donald Trump, is very in a way, I think it feels like Animal Farms are predicted the future in a way. This book was published in like the 1950s, I think, and yeah, it really stands out to me now as a book that kind of predicted the future with the way things are now politically in this country. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Carrie, for the book tag and the tier ranking list headings. Have a great night.